District Attorney Dan Conley recently decided against criminal charges for the fatal shooting of a man last October in the South End by a Boston police officer. His office says Terrence Coleman was shot after trying to attack police and medical workers with a kitchen knife. But aside from possible criminal charges, the case has raised questions about civil rights and policy on response to emergencies involving people with mental illness. Among those raising concerns are the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice. We'd like to welcome the committee's Civil Rights Fellow, Oren Nimni. Thank you very much for being with us, Oren.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Your organization has been working with Terrence's mother, Hope Coleman. Talk about her reaction to this.
Yeah, we've been working with Hope kind of from the beginning, helping her cooperate with the DA's investigation and now investigating all the legal possibilities that she has moving forward to find justice for Terrence. I think, she's disappointed with the DA's investigation. She feels like there was no justice out of the investigation and that the investigation was compromised by the lack of an independent prosecutor. The Dan Connolly's office works hand in hand with the police every day, and I think there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there. So I think she wants justice for Terrence and justice for the rest of her family, and doesn't feel like she found that here.
Walk us through the events a little bit, because she has had problems with her son like this before, and so this time she calls 911, but she wants emergency medical people. She does not want police coming into her home.
That's correct. Terrence had dealt with mental health issues off and on throughout most of his life, and she called the Boston Emergency Medical Services, kind of seeking, I think like any of us would do. A member of our family is having a mental health crisis, and it is an emergency situation that maybe we can't deal with. And so she calls the medical experts to come and say, hey, can you help me out with this? Can you make sure everyone's safe and that, my son gets the attention that he deserves? But I think she was very clear that she didn't want the police, and because they would escalate the situation, that he was already kind of in a fragile state, and that the police coming in and being aggressive and with force, that would make the situation worse. Sadly, what ended up happening was the police came in, even though she repeatedly requested that they not, and they ended up shooting Terrence and killing him.
Talk about what brought the police in, because I know at first they were sort of staying in the background or even down the street with another preoccupation, but were they brought in, as the DA says, because the emergency medical workers were threatened, or did they just happen to just come in for a less justified reason?
We're still kind of combing through all the evidence that's come out of the investigation. We just got it, and it's a huge file. But what I can say is from the beginning that Hope has testified and said publicly that she never saw her son with a knife, which is kind of the justification that's been given for why the police were called in and why the emergency medical staff felt threatened. And I think the important issue to focus on here is that she called for medical services. She explicitly said, we want, my family needs medical assistance, medical attention, and instead she got police officers armed with guns that ended up shooting and killing her son.
Has anyone been able to show that the presence of police might have been what triggered the agitation in Terrence, or lots of other things could have done that too?
I think there are a number of different possibilities, and we're not really sure what caused the agitation. It's clear that he was dealing with mental health issues for a long period in his life, and that probably different interaction would have been more helpful. Interaction with medical staff who are trained in dealing with mental health issues, and particularly are trained in de-escalating situations. I think a lot of other jurisdictions and a lot of other countries have training for their police officers, particularly when dealing with situations like this, where police will step back or medical professionals will step back, they'll de-escalate the situation, there'll be accountability, there'll be transparency, and there's much more training on dealing with this kind of situations.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Oren Nimni from the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice. Oren, the statement right after the DA's decision on your part in Hope Coleman's is that the death of Terrence could have been avoided. How could it have been avoided, do you think?
I think there are a number of ways that it could have been avoided. I think when the police came in, that already sets up a mentality of confrontation and aggression. I think that there are a number of things that the police could do, including better training and better procedures in these kind of situations that could have prevented his death. Also using non-deadly force and deferring to medical personnel, I think would have been other things that probably would have saved Terrence's life. It seems from the situation that there was no necessity that he die.
What about using other things to incapacitate him, other than conventional guns and bullets? I mean, there have been other things done by police sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's a traditional tactic taken by a number of different police departments across the country and in other countries. And I think anything where Terrence's life would have been saved would have been a step in the right direction. I think it's unclear that any kind of force was necessary here, and that's, I think, what we would prefer, and that's what Hope would have preferred, and I assume Terrence. But any non-lethal force, I think, would be better than lethal force for sure.
Well, the question the DA had to answer was whether the responders did anything criminal. They might have done something ill-advised or even rash, but that's not criminal. So, I mean, was the DA off base necessarily?
I think it's hard to evaluate whether the DA was off-based. I think there's an inherent lack of trust in the process that was taken. Like I was saying before, if there had been an independent investigator, if there had been more transparency in the investigation process, perhaps we would be more able at the lawyers committee and in the community, more able to trust the findings. But the district attorney's office has an inherent conflict of interest. They work with the police every single day. They kind of have to, have a good relationship with them. And, this shooting follows into a kind of a pattern, a national trend of police killing young African American men and not being held accountable. And so I think, as far as whether there was criminal liability or not, we can't really say because there were so many flaws in the investigation.
Talk about the civil rights issue, because this is not the first time that someone with a mental illness has been killed in an encounter with police. But beyond that, talk about the race factor.
Well, I think race is a factor that can't be ignored. I think over the past couple of years, because of evolutions in cell phone video technology and officer videotape from police cars and from body cams, we've seen specific anecdotal evidence, and we also have a lot of statistical evidence that there's a disturbing trend of disproportional impact on communities of color, particularly Black communities, that police officers regularly kill young black men in particular, and also are not held accountable for those killings, and that Terrence Coleman's death falls into that national trend. Things that we've seen from Tamir Rice to Eric Garner, all the cases that we've been hearing about over the past couple of years. I think Terrence Coleman sadly falls squarely within that narrative.
Even beyond civil rights, we also had this case in Hingham, all white parties. I think somebody ended up shooting himself after a police response that a lot of people questioned. How do you look at a new way of responding to cases like this, that you've got people who are probably, if not provably, mentally ill?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we look at the Hingham case, that was a case that had a lot of similarities to this. There, the SWAT team came in. They responded to a mental health crisis with an excessive show of force. The SWAT team came in. The parents of the young man in Hingham kept saying, no, 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 we don't want the police to come in. That will just escalate the situation. Let us talk to our son. And he ended up killing himself. I think it's clear that responses that involve excessive force don't help people with mental health issues, and that better training on de-escalation, on suicide prevention, on de-escalating violent situations would be much more helpful both to the families of the people that are undergoing crisis and to the people themselves, as well as to the police officers, who I think want both themselves and the people that they're trying to serve to be safe.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Oren Nimni from the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice.